What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. I've done such directors in the past, such as Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg, those directors and many more directors that you guys can check out in my director playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video, so you know it. This time around, I'm focusing on Mel Brooks films and ranking them from worst to best. Now, keep in mind, this is just specifically focusing on films that Mel Brooks has directed. It's not going to be any films that he acted in, produced, did short films, video games, TV shows, none of that. Specifically speaking, feature-length films. And as of the filming of this video, which is May of 2024, he has done 11 feature-length films, so I'll be ranking them from 11 being his worst to 1 being his best, and of course, my humble opinion. And it goes without saying, but keep in mind, my list will be different from yours, and that's what's great about film. It is subjective, and I'm looking forward to seeing your list of Mel Brooks films ranked down below in the comment section. But guys, enough exposition. Let's get started. So kicking things off, number 11, we have Dracula, Dead and Loving It. I did not like this movie. This was a subpar effort from Mel Brooks. I like Leslie Nielsen, but this movie is just going through the motions. I didn't laugh in the slightest. Filmmaking is subpar. There's really nothing about this movie where I'm like, yeah. I would only watch this movie if, like myself, you were trying to watch all Mel Brooks films. Other than that, avoid this movie at all costs. And that's why it's my number 11. Next up, my number 10, we have The 12 Chairs. The 12 Chairs is a film that on paper is something that would be up my alley. Like, it sounds a lot like It's a Mad World. But unfortunately, in execution, it just isn't funny. The acting is okay for sure, but there really isn't anything to grasp onto in terms of this movie. Like, watching it, it was a very passive experience. I liked it slightly more than Dracula, Dead and Loving It, but again, same thing applies with Dracula, Dead and Loving It. I wouldn't really recommend The 12 Chairs in the slightest unless you're trying to watch all of his films. Other than that, avoid this movie. That's why it is my number 10. Next up, my number 9, we have Life Stinks. More like should have been called This Movie Stinks. Life Stinks is a movie that the premise is something that intrigued me. I think that there aren't that many movies that tackle homelessness, and from what I understood going into this movie, it was going to be combining comedy and drama. Unfortunately, the comedy fell flat, and at the same time, the dramatic beats that were attempted also fell flat. The premise, again, on paper sounded fascinating, but in execution, it was very sloppy. I do like the acting. I do think that Mel Brooks gives a pretty good performance. Some of the makeup's good, and I do like how the city itself does feel like a character in itself as well. So I do like those aspects. So it's a disappointment, but again, I do like it better than those other two movies. So again, I think the movie stinks, but I can understand why some people might like this. And Mel Brooks himself also says that this is the most proud work of his. So I can respect that, but for me, again, it is my number 9. Next up, my number 8, we have History of the World, Part 1. So this is a movie that when I saw it, it confused me because I was like, okay, it's Part 1, so where's Part 2? And it just really bothered me that there wasn't a Part 2. I was like, why would you put a Part 1, but you don't know if there's going to be a Part 2? And I actually checked the other day, and apparently there is a History of the World Part 2, but it's like a TV show. So I didn't watch the TV show because, again, I don't include TV shows with these director ranking lists, but maybe I'll check out the TV show. But this is a movie that I like the setting. I like the actors involved. I do like what it's poking fun of, specifically those biblical epics that came out back in the 60s, 50s, 60s. But unfortunately, I only had a couple laughs here and there throughout this movie. And again, there really isn't much that stands out about this movie other than when I saw it, I remember there being a couple chuckles here and there, enjoying Mel Brooks' performance, and again, also appreciating what it was poking fun of. But unfortunately, I was disappointed, but I liked it better than these other movies, and that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7, we have High Anxiety. So this is a movie that pokes fun of Alfred Hitchcock movies. Specifically speaking, like Vertigo, Psycho, Rear Window, his most popular work. And again, I love Alfred Hitchcock. I love the fact that Mel Brooks also does, clearly, because that's why he is parodying his films. But it's very haphazardous in terms of like what works and what doesn't in regards to him poking fun of. Like, there are, of course, some scenes that I do appreciate, and I also do think that at times it was funny that Mel Brooks kept saying high anxiety in the movie entitled High Anxiety. But I thought this movie was but that's why I have it as my number 7. Next up, my number 6, we have Robin Hood, Men in Tights. So I think one of the funniest things about this movie has to be Gary Elwes making fun of Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which It goes without saying, the movie does a lot of parodies, but I just like how they call out Kevin Costner's accent and how he didn't even attempt to do like an English accent in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. But that's like the joke that over the years, like that's a joke that has stood the test of time where I'm like, I always like think about it when I think about this movie. But other than that, you'll notice a trend with Mel Brooks movies in terms of what I'm saying. And that's because a lot of his movies are hit or miss. The jokes are haphazard. And this is a movie that's no different. The difference is, this movie I like slightly more than these other movies because some of these jokes actually I thought were funny. Some of them weren't funny. But you can definitely tell that Mel Brooks is having fun, the cast is having fun, and that's something that I do appreciate. I can see that, and for myself, there were moments that I too was also having fun. So overall, it's a middle of the road type movie, but I can see why there's a huge following for this movie. I really can. And yeah, that is why it's number 6. And now we get to the nitty gritty, top 5, guys. So I promise I'll be a bit more enthusiastic. It's just those other movies from 6 to 11, I just don't really have too much to say about them because while watching them, it was just like, okay, all right, how much longer? These next 5 wasn't really as much the case. My number 5, this is going to be a hot take because I know a lot of people are probably going to have this as their number 1 or 2. I can appreciate that. My number 5, we have Spaceballs. I think that this movie, despite being middle of the road, it does have some really good moments. I think that it parodying Star Wars does work at times. I think like Darth Yogurt, I think stuff like that does work. And I do think that especially if you are a fan of Star Wars, you'll really dig this movie because again, it's parodying the Star Wars movies, but it's doing it in like a loving way. Mel Brooks is good in this in terms of his acting. The directing is okay for sure, but this is one of those parodies that I think is better than most, and that's why I do like it slightly more than Robin Hood Men in Tights. I'm saying Men in Thieves. Men in Tights. And that's the thing, if someone were to ask me which I like better, I was thinking about that while ranking this list, and I was like, you know what? I would sit down and rewatch Spaceballs over Robin Hood Men in Tights. And that's why I have it a little bit higher as my number 5. But yeah, my number 4, this is one I saw recently, and I gotta say, I enjoy this one. My number 4, we have Silent Movie. So Silent Movie, I knew going into it that it was parodying silent movies. What I didn't know was that the entire movie was actually going to be silent. And I really, really appreciate Mel Brooks as a director and writer really going for it and having the balls to have a movie that is a silent movie. Like, I think that is just brilliant. It really is brilliant because it's really adhering to the guidelines of what a silent movie is. So I really like that. And I will also say I do think that there are some jokes that do land. I also like how there's only one word that's actually said audibly, and it's a pretty funny moment. So again, I think the movie is okay, but I really do appreciate that it actually stuck with the shtick that it set out from the opening minute. And yeah, I like this movie, and I would highly recommend Silent Movie, and that's why it is my number 4. Next up, my number 3, we have Young Frankenstein. So Young Frankenstein is a movie I saw, I think it was like 10, 11 years ago, so I decided to rewatch it a week or so ago, and on rewatch, I definitely appreciated a lot more of the raunchy humor that I just didn't pick up on 10, 11 years ago. I also really like, I've seen a lot of those like, you know, Frankenstein movies like now that I didn't 10, 11 years ago. So I was able to also pick up on the parody aspects of what Mel Brooks was doing with Young Frankenstein. Love the black and white cinematography. I also really like the makeup. Some of the humor, as I mentioned, works. So it's a rock solid comedy. I know a lot of people that have Spaceballs or Young Frankenstein as the number 1. I can totally see that. But for me, there were 2 movies that I liked better than Young Frankenstein. But again, can totally respect someone have this as the number 1. But yeah, Young Frankenstein for me, it's my number 3. Next up, my number 2. This is a movie that for the longest time was actually my number 1 until a couple days ago. My number 2, we have Blazing Saddles. So Blazing Saddles, this is the movie that made me actually want to set out and watch all Mel Brooks films. It took me a decade to do that because I got sidetracked with other stuff. But Blazing Saddles, right away when I watched it a decade ago, I immediately really appreciated the humor and what it was going for and what it was poking fun of, which is the Western genre. And I also think that the meta fourth wall breaking third act is just really brilliantly done. But the thing about Blazing Saddles that I noticed was that when I watched it the second time 7 years ago, I thought it was funny, but I didn't find it as funny. And on this watch, which was, I believe, my third viewing, when I watched it a week or so ago, I didn't find the first and second act to be as funny as I remember. Sure, there were some moments here and there that I did find funny and chuckled here and there, but it wasn't until the third act that really brought the movie full steam ahead for me, where I was like, yes, I can see why this was my favorite Mel Brooks film for a long time. Because I think that everything that he's going for, it works sometimes in regards to the first and second act, but everything that he tries to do in that third act, the breakneck speed of his directing, the pacing, and just the ambition, I think it really works. And that's why I really, really love that third act of Blazing Saddles. It is silly, it's funny, and it is just wild. I love the fourth wall breaks. So I really like Blazing Saddles. Again, this was for the longest time my number one, but there was a film that I decided to rewatch exactly 10 years after I first saw it. And I rewatched that, what was it? Let's see, today's Sunday. I watched it Friday, so 2 days ago. And that is my number one. The movie that, in my eyes, is the best Mel Brooks film. My number one is The Producers. So The Producers, I saw it in May of 2014. And recently, I was trying to rewatch some of Mel Brooks' films, and The Producers was one of them, because I had it originally as my number three, because I remember The Producers when I saw it a decade ago. I remember liking it, but not really laughing that much about it. And I was like, you know what, let me rewatch it just in preparation for this video. And I gotta say, not only did I love the originality of this film, not only did I really like the characters, the pacing, I loved the humor. I thought the humor was consistently funny. There were some moments that genuinely had me laughing out loud. I also think that the character development, the arcs, are really, really good. This was his first film, and I have to say, it is still kind of insane how he was able to pull all this off. Like, in terms of his creativity, in terms of his writing, his directing, everything came together with this film. This is a film that I am looking forward to picking up on Blu-ray because, again, I really liked it that much. I think that I'm going to get into now in terms of Mel Brooks as a whole, because I try to talk about the director after I'm done my ranking, so I'll do that now. Mel Brooks is a director that part of me does wish that he continued on with what he was doing with The Producers, where it's like, as a filmmaker, trying to get better and better, instead of just focusing on a certain genre and parodying it. It's something that, yeah, it's fun, it's fine, it's enjoyable, but I think that as a filmmaker, I do wish that he pushed himself more. But he's a director that's very hit or miss in terms of the humor and in terms of like the movies like working. But I can definitely see why he is considered one of the best comedians. He has really good timing. And I think that although his directing sometimes isn't that special, there are moments like in The Producers or Blazing Saddles where he's on to something. He does such a good job with it. So not personally one of my favorite directors, but he is a director that I greatly respect. And yeah, that's why I decided to watch all his films. And honestly, as I mentioned, full circle moment, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I am looking forward to seeing your ranking of Mel Brooks films down below. Again, just the ones that he's directed. And as always, I really do appreciate you guys for watching, and with the subscription, notification bell, follow me down on Letterboxd, and I'll catch you guys later.